Today's video is a continuation of our discussion on Saul Kripke's theory of proper name. In our previous video on this session, we have tried to understand how Kripke is criticizing Fregean notion of sense, and he is trying to pinpoint the inherent problem in Fregean theory of proper name. And he felt the need to separate two different facets of Frege's theory of sense. What are those two different facets? To recapitulate it briefly, I'm going to state it. First one is giving the semantic content. So Aristotle was the famous student of Plato. Aristotle is a proper name, and the definite description, the famous student of Plato, is the semantic content of the proper name Aristotle. So on the one aspect, sense is the semantic content of a proper name. And another different aspect of sense is it fixes the reference. It is a route to the reference. It enables us to pick out the thing or the individual that the name refers to. Alright, so these are the two different aspects in Fregean notion of sense. Frege made a mistake. He has conflated these two different notions, to these two different facets of sense, and this has given rise to a problem that Saul Kripke addressed in his book Naming and Necessity. And in the portion of his first lecture, he mentions this, that Frege should be criticized for this conflation. And if Fregean theory of sense were correct, then some claims that are contingent would turn out to be necessary, as we elaborately dissected in our last video. For example, Aristotle was the famous student of Plato. This is a contingent truth, because there could have been possibilities where Aristotle is not the student of Plato. He could have been the student of other teachers. Alright, so this is a contingent truth. Aristotle happens to be the student of Plato. He happened to be the student of Plato. This is a contingent truth. So the proposition Aristotle is a student of Plato is a contingent truth. Whereas if Fregean notion of sense were true, then Aristotle was the student of Plato. Aristotle and the definite description, the student of Plato. These two were become synonymous, and one can substitute Aristotle for the other. Okay. So by substituting one for the other, since it is a semantic content, meaning of the name Aristotle, one can reformulate the statement, the famous student of Plato was student of Plato. This is of course a necessary true statement. Why? Because it is a priori true, necessary true. There is no doubt about it. In all the possible situations, all possible words, it is necessarily true that the most famous student of Plato was student of Plato. Okay. Now, if the first proposition, Aristotle was the student of Plato, number one proposition, and the second proposition, the most famous student of Plato was Plato, student of Plato, the most famous student of Plato was student of Plato. Now, the second proposition is necessary, and any proposition that is synonymous with necessary proposition would also turn out to be necessary. So in that case, the first one, you remember, first proposition was Aristotle was the student of Plato. This contingent statement would turn out to be necessary statement. That is the problem of Fregean notion of sense, and this gives rise to unpalatable situation. So if we if a name's associated definite description or a cluster of definite descriptions only fixes the reference without giving the semantic content, then we will be able to resist such unpalatable situation. I'm repeating it again. If a proper name's associated definite description would only fix the reference but do not provide any semantic content, we will be able to resist such unpalatable situation. Since in that case, Aristotle and the student of Plato, the proper name Aristotle and the definite description, the student of Plato, they are not, this is not the semantic content of the proper name. If this be the case, then the two propositions that I have mentioned, like I mentioned now, are not synonymous and may well express different propositions. All right. The second one may be necessary and the first one will be contingent. The second one means the famous student of Plato was a student of Plato. It's necessary. And if it is not synonymous with the former one, Aristotle was the student of Plato, then it would be contingent. So what I mean, don't mix it up, do not complicate it. If a name just fixes the reference, if the name's associated description just fixes the reference, a name's associated description is what? Aristotle is a proper name and its associated description is the most famous student of Plato. If this only fixes the reference, that means enable us to pick out the individual that is referred to by the proper name Aristotle and do not give any semantic content, then what would happen? It would restrict all the unpalatable situation that has been risen because of Fregean conflation of two different facets of sense. Frege says that a sense is the semantic content of a proper name. If it is so, then some contingent claim would turn out to be necessary true. As we discussed, Aristotle was the student of Plato. It is a contingent truth. We can imagine such situation, or it could have been the case, it might have been the case, this could have been, might have been, this actually suggests that there are all possibilities that Aristotle could not have been student of Plato. So this is a contingent truth. In one possible situation, it happened to be the case that Aristotle was a student of Plato. So it is not necessarily true. It is just contingent truth. Whereas if we say that Aristotle is equal to the student of Plato, this definite description is the semantic content of Aristotle, then what would happen? This would turn out to be necessary truth. Contingent truth would turn out to be necessary truth. Okay, having clarified this idea, now Kripke sharply distinguishes between two notions, aprioricity and necessity. Aprioricity is a epistemic concept. We know something independent of experience, sense experience. We know it. When we know something independent of experience, we call it a priori knowledge. Whereas necessity is a metaphysical concept. Okay. Something is necessarily true when it is true in all the possible worlds. For example, the famous student of Plato was student of Plato. Do we need to empirically gather any evidence to ensure the truth of this statement? Do we need any empirical evidence? to know the truth of the particular statement? The famous student of Plato was student of Plato for this proposition? Absolutely not. This is known. I mean, this is a priori true. Okay. And at the same time, this is true in all possible worlds without exception. All right. And what is contingent truth? So, a priori is epistemic concept. It says origin of knowledge. How do we know something? Do we know something from experience, or we know something independent of experience? This is epistemic concept. Okay. And necessity is a metaphysical concept where a proposition is necessarily true if it is true in all possible worlds. And contingent truth is that it could have been otherwise. Contingent truth means it is true in some possible cases, but it could have been otherwise. Okay. Like Aristotle was a student of Plato. It's a contingent truth. It could have been otherwise. He could not have been student of Plato. That is why it is contingent truth. It is not true in all possible worlds. It is true in one possible situation or one possible world, but it could have been otherwise. That is why it is not necessarily true, rather contingent truth. Okay. It is a commonplace in philosophy to think that these two notions coincide. What are these two notions? Necessity and a priority coincide. It's a commonplace in philosophy. If you remember, in Kantian philosophy, Kant actually clubbed necessity and a priority together, and he said, whatever is known a priori true must be necessarily true. So if it can be known a priori that a proposition P, then it can be known that it is necessary that P. And conversely, whatever can be known necessarily true can be known a priori true. Okay. Predecessors thought this way. This was the traditional way of understanding a priority and necessity. They coincide. This was the traditional picture. But Kripke criticized this traditional picture, and he asserted that necessary a posteriori, contingent a priori, these can also happen. So there could be some truths that are necessary a posteriori and contingent a priori. Besides, necessary a priori true, necessary a posteriori true, contingent a priori true, contingent a posteriori true. There are 4 possible combinations. According to the traditional philosophers, only necessary a priori and contingent a posteriori truth were possible. But Kripke said that no, at the same time, necessary a posteriori and contingent a priori truths are also possible. Whatever is necessary can also be established. Empirically we can discover some necessary truth. We can empirically discover necessary truth. As example for necessary a posteriori proposition, he says, water is H2O. Water is H2O. So this is a necessary truth because it is true in all possible worlds, and at the same time it is a posteriori because we arrived at this statement by empirical observation. It is not something that we have known a priori. It's not that. We have come to know this proposition after empirical investigation. So this is a posteriori and at the same time necessary because it is true in all possible world, all possible states of world. And about contingent a priori, he has given an example. The standard meter stick is 1 meter long. The standard meter stick is 1 meter long. You can see the examples in page number 54 and 56, where he is discussing the examples of the necessary a priori propositions, necessary a posteriori, contingent a priori and contingent a posteriori proposition. He is in detail, he is elaborating this particular topic. Now, another important point that I'm going to mention, that Kripke's position is that every identity statement that contains proper names, every identity statement whose terms are proper names, is a necessary truth, if it is true at all, even though most such statements are known empirically a posteriori. So, to exemplify this position of Kripke, we can say that Hesperus is phosphorus. This is an identity statement whose terms are proper name. Hesperus is a proper name, phosphorus is a proper name, and this is necessarily true because Hesperus and phosphorus refers to one and the same individual, Venus, the planet Venus. Okay. So, they are known empirically. They have been, this identity statement, we have come to know about this identity statement after empirical investigation, empirical discovery. Having said this, let's move to the topic. Kripke's thesis, main thesis of proper name. Names are rigid designators. Kripke calls both names and definite descriptions as designators. Aristotle is a proper name and definite descriptions is associated definite description, the most famous student of Plato. Name and its associated definite descriptions, Kripke calls both designator. Okay. And makes clear that he is considering definite description attributively. If you remember, what does it mean? What it is for something to attributively denote something. A speaker uses a definite description attributively in an assertion, states something about whoever and whatsoever is the so and so. He does not have any particular person in mind while uttering the definite description. He just states something about whoever or whatever satisfies the definite descriptions. Kripke also uses definite description in that sense, in that attributive sense, as Donnellan would put it. And now coming back to rigid designator. A rigid designator is something that designates the same object in all possible worlds. Now, regarding possible world, one thing needs to be clarified. Possible world simply is a way thing might have been. It's not something that could be visited on a spaceship or could be seen through a telescope. It's not like that. Kripke admits this is a misnomer. The term possible world is a misnomer. It might better be called a possible state of world, possible state of situation, or ways thing might have been, or a counterfactual situation. Better understand it as a counterfactual situation, way things might have been. So Kripke makes this clear in the preface to the monograph version of Naming and Necessity in page number 15. You can go through and check what he understands by possible world. This is a very important notion in Kripke's philosophy. Now, again, let's delve into the concept of rigid designator. Consider the definite description. The inventor of bifocals is a non-rigid designator. So for Kripke, proper names are rigid designator and definite descriptions are non-rigid designator. Proper names are rigid designator because it designates the same object in all possible worlds, whereas definite description, for example, the inventor of bifocal, the most famous student of Plato, the teacher of Alexander the Great, these are all definite descriptions. These are non-rigid designators because they designate different individuals in different possible worlds. So, in this actual world, Benjamin Franklin is the inventor of bifocal. Okay, but thing might have been different. Someone else might have invented bifocals in possible world. We can imagine some possible situation, possible state of world where somebody else has invented bifocals. Okay. But Benjamin Franklin, according to Kripke, is a rigid designator. There could have been no way in which, according to, there could have been no way things might have gone according to which Franklin would not have been Franklin. He might have been a different sort of person completely, but he could not have been someone else. So, to put it simply, the inventor of bifocal is a non-rigid designator because it could designate different persons in different possible situation. In actual world, it designates Benjamin Franklin, but there might have been possible state of world where somebody else have invented bifocals. Okay, but there could have been no way according to which Franklin would not have been Franklin. Yeah, it could be the case that Franklin is completely a different sort of person. He's not a scientist, he's not an inventor of bifocal, but it could never be the case that he would be someone else. So Franklin would continue to be Franklin. There could be no possible situation in which Franklin would cease to be Franklin. Franklin would be Franklin in all possible situations. So, the proper name Benjamin Franklin is a rigid designator. Now, in this context, two things needs to be introduced. So, Kripke introduced two important caveats in page number 296 that tend to make the notion of a rigid designator a little more complicated. So the first one is the object designated by a rigid designator does not have to exist in all possible worlds. It's a very important, it's a very nuanced understanding of rigid designator. The object denoted by a rigid designator does not have to exist in all possible world. It does not have to be a necessary object. Yeah, Benjamin Franklin might have existed, but still the name Benjamin Franklin Benjamin Franklin might never existed. It could, definitely, couldn't it be possible that Benjamin Franklin might never existed, but still the name Benjamin Franklin is a rigid designator. It designates the same object in every possible world. There are some possible worlds in which Franklin does not exist, in which the name Benjamin Franklin simply does not designate anything that exists in the world. So this was this was the one claim that Kripke introduces. Another claim is that a designator is a rigid. Does not mean that we cannot imagine a possible world in which the designator is used differently from the way it is actually used. We can imagine a world in which a different set of parents named a different person Benjamin Franklin, but that would not be a world in which someone else as we use the name Benjamin Franklin. Kripke stresses it is the way we use designator in question that determines which object in a possible world it designates. The way we use the expression the inventor of bifocals attributively, it designates with respect to a given possible world whoever invented bifocals in that world. So in the actual world it designates Franklin, in another possible world it designates Spinoza, yet in another possible world it designates no one. Imagine a possible world in which there were no bifocals, or in which they were found growing on trees. So the point is, the two claims that Kripke introduced need to be understood very clearly. First one is the object denoted by a rigid designator does not have to exist in all possible world. There could have been some possible situation where nothing exists. Nothing exists. I mean, that the proper name does not designate anything in the world, in the possible world. Another claim is the designator is the claim that is the designator is rigid does not mean that we cannot imagine a possible world that in which that designator is used differently from the way actually it is used. So these are the two claims, and we shall proceed clarifying those issues critically in our subsequent videos. Okay, I don't want to make this video too long. It took 28 minutes. So let's wind up here. We shall again continue from here onwards. Okay.